nobody really understands, apart from a few hardcore geeks, how virtualization works. 15 years ago, you kind of needed to know that. And I think we're in the same space with some of these cloud native technologies, which is, it seems to be everywhere, but it's still very, very early days. And the industry as a whole, I think, is an early adopter, which is an unusual thing to see in our industry, but that's what's happening right now with cloud native. We're all early adopters, and it's all kind of shaking out in real time.
This is the Tech Barometer Podcast. I'm Jason Lopez, and this is our cloud coverage episode with Steve McDowell, a senior analyst of data and storage at More Insights and Strategy.
You don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, and unless you become an expert, which makes no sense.
Right.
We spent a lot of time talking about the individual technologies today, but the reality is in 3 to 5 years, they're going to be baked into everything.
Right. Okay. Well, Steve, I wonder if you could just start us off by at least talking about what cloud native even means. And I'm sorry for the Sesame Street question.
Cloud native it's one of those terms. It's becoming more overloaded daily, right? It means different things to different people. It's very contextual. Cloud native is about packaging, managing, and running a workload that is sensitive to its environment.
Okay, so that's level one, let's say.
Yeah.
Let's go a level deeper. Can you expand on what you just said?
Cloud historically has been a destination. It's a data center that lives somewhere that's not mine. It's running on equipment that I didn't pay for, but I'm paying to use. And certainly a whole industry is built up around that. But when we talk about cloud today, and cloud native starts to play a part in this conversation, cloud is more about an experience. When people say, I want the cloud, what they really mean is I want the ability to flexibly deploy resources and reconfigure them as needed. That's what cloud means to people. Cloud native is a set of things. It's an architecture, it's a set of practices, it's a set of technologies that allow me to package up a workload so that I can deploy that flexible experience. And maybe it's in the public cloud, maybe it's right here on my laptop, right? And the easy example there are things like container, Dockers, Kubernetes. Those allow me to package up the resources and dependencies I need and make a workload portable and flexible. Because for IT, right, it's really all about the flexibility of experience.
So in terms of the pandemic, how were businesses able to respond to changes? Was it because of the cloud? Was it cloud that enabled IT to do that?
IT is all about adapting to the needs of the organization and making sure data is where it needs to be in a way that's timely and reliable so that the business owners can consume that data and make the right sorts of decisions. And if 2020 taught us anything, it's that you need to be able to dynamically reconfigure your data center based on the environment and based on what's happening in the world. Most of the world's enterprises went remote workforce. The companies that adopted software-defined whatever, right, were the ones that were able to keep the business flowing forward. The ones that were tied to more legacy technologies are the ones that really struggled. And it doesn't take a lot of Googling through the news sources to find examples of both. Is it going to put your company out of business if you don't adopt it? Probably not, but it's going to make you a laggard in your industry.
Yeah, I've heard from IT people that years of data center plans were compressed into 2020. A lot of companies accelerated their roadmaps.
Yeah.
What's your sense of adoption in terms of, do or die?
Companies aren't in danger of going out of business if they're not adopting cloud native technologies. I think that's a little too scary, a little too far out. But they do lose their competitive edge and they do lose their ability to compete effectively. It's a dynamic environment, and cloud native is the way now that we provide responsive IT services.
Right. I don't want to veer into a question of automation per se, but the idea of it brings up, how complex all this can get when operations extend beyond, and I've heard this many times, what humans are capable of doing. And as you said earlier, and I'm sort of paraphrasing this, that, expertise can take you way down the rabbit hole, but who's capable of seeing everything?
The biggest challenge from that perspective in cloud native is just the vast universe of different solutions to all of the different problems that I kind of touched on. This is a world that evolved very rapidly. We weren't talking about cloud native 5 years ago, right? 5 years ago, we were still trying to figure out what cloud meant. It's more than just Dockers and Kubernetes, right? It's all the things around storage, around manageability, around integration with my non-Kubernetes world. If I look at what's broken in that world, it's that there's too many choices. At the end of the day, the best approach to cloud native is a consistent management plane across both what I'm deploying from a container perspective and deploying from a non-container perspective. And that doesn't exist today, right? There's a number of point solutions, right? Nutanix, can service that market. VMware services that market. HPE's got kind of their own proprietary thing going around. So there's no one answer for IT. So if I look at what's needed in that space, it's more standardization, continued standardization. And that's going to come, right? Again, we're still very early days here. If I'm an IT practitioner, I have to make bets on things that will become standard. And that's still a hard choice. So, for an IT guy, it becomes less about what are the technologies I'm deploying and what partner am I going to engage with that's going to deliver those technologies over time.
Well, it's interesting, that idea of standardization. I talked to a technologist recently who cited things like Kubernetes, for example, opening the floodgates to having a way to manage containers, in a consistent way. I didn't have time to go into it then, but I wonder if you could comment on that idea.
Sure. So when we talk about cloud native, right, it's a set of technologies that allow me to, again, create a workload that can be deployed flexibly and reliably. And at its heart, cloud native is about taking an application and putting it in a container. And there's many ways to do that. Docker is probably the most visible. Once I have a workload in a container, that abstracts out and isolates all of the dependencies for that workload. So now I can place that anywhere. So that's A, right? B is, how do I place that anywhere? And then we start talking about container orchestration systems. And that's where things like Kubernetes and OpenStack, that allowed me to take these containers that I put my workloads in and deploy them where it makes the most sense. If it makes the most sense, it could be that, I have spare resources on pre-bought instances in the public cloud that are free at night. And, I can just deploy these containers over there. Or maybe I need to migrate them from one place to the other. Containers started in the DevOps world where I had lots of ephemeral workloads, right? I'm doing a few quick tasks and then going away. But what we found now is that model makes a lot of sense for more enterprise application, business critical application kind of workloads. It's about containers, about container orchestration, and then all of the things around that, right? How do I take now, I have a certain subset of my applications, not all of them, that are adhering to this architecture. How do I manage those alongside the ones that aren't there, right? So not only do I have container orchestration, now I need to look at kind of my enterprise orchestration as well. So all these things have to fit together. And then, around that sit things like, how do I do data protection? Right? It's very different for containers as it might be for a more virtual machine driven workload. How do I do storage and persistent storage and migration across cloud boundaries? So there's all sorts of issues that need to be handled from a management plane perspective. So really, it's a set of container technologies for isolation. It's a set of container management so that I can deploy and manage those containers. And then it's really about, how do I manage data across my enterprise in a more holistic way.
Gotcha. I looked up some infographics on cloud native, and they tend to look super simple, I got to say. And I looked up some other verticals, and they can be mind-boggling and complex. And that kind of leads me to conclude the reason there aren't mind-boggling cloud native infographics, at least they weren't the top ones in the search that I did, is because they're just too complex.
It is, and it gets more complex every day. I talked to a storage company recently who acquired a container management system, and they were giving me some statistics, right? In a traditional enterprise with, virtual machine-based workloads, I'm doing, storage management operations, not storage reads and writes, right? But storage management operations, in the single digits to low double digits a day, right? And as soon as I turn on Kubernetes and containers, it goes up by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. So instead of, a dozen management operations, by which, it could mean attach a disk drive, detach a disk drive, mount a volume, whatever, it goes into the hundreds. as people move these container things, spin them up, spin them down, move them around. So all of this technology around us that is very well supported, the kinds of IT architectures that we've grown up with, they all need to change. And we're learning about that, again, I think in real time. As we run applications and run into issues, we're like, oh, we better go fix that, right? So that's where we are.
Well, I appreciate your insights in helping us to, put together, I don't know, an audio version of an infographic, however brief this is. I'm wondering, to close, how would you sum this up?
I think, again, cloud native, it's about the flexibility of experience, and to really deliver that and to deliver that with value over time. As an IT buyer, as IT administrator, as an IT architect, I don't want to marry myself necessarily to a set of technologies that are tied to an OEM's hardware. I want the flexibility to run a workload anywhere. And I don't know that the OEMs are always incented to give me the ability to go run that on somebody else's cloud. When I'm looking at what's the right kind of management plane technology for cloud native and blended environment, because we're all going to be in a blended environment forever, it's going to be the ones that are trying to solve the software-defined data center problem, if you will, right? And that's going to be VMware and Nutanix. I mean, those are the top dogs. The other solutions are going to exist and have their sense of traction, but at the end of the day, right, I want a consistent experience across all of my resources. I'll never get that, but I'm going to go look at the folks in the industry that are driving that vision.
Steve McDowell is Senior Analyst at More Insights and Strategy, covering data and storage. This is Cloud Coverage, the Tech Barometer Podcast. I'm Jason Lopez. Tech Barometer is produced by The Forecast, and you can find us at theforecastbynutanix.com.